After the United States and then parts of the European Union lowered a hammer on Russia and Vladimir Putin, the world waited for the inevitable reaction. Needless to say, few, if any, expected the dictator/president to reach for the Bluto-Blutarsky solution and initiate a food fight. But that only makes one wonder what is next to emerge from the KGB mind of Putin and his criminal cohorts. As troops mass on the Ukraine border and the possibility of more blood being on his hands becomes a stark reality. Let us welcome into MidPoint, representing the 16th District of Illinois and a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Representative Adam Kinzinger joins us today. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
What is it that we can then expect next? Because it certainly seems interesting that the president, and I use the phrase president/dictator, decides to keep food out of his people's hands, is now talking about planes not flying over his own airspace. It's an awful lot of rhetoric and saber rattling going on here, but in reality, what's next for Putin to do?
Well, look, I think Putin's position is becoming increasingly desperate, which means he's becoming increasingly unpredictable. The thing we have to understand as a country is sanctions were, in essence, the first punch in this street fight. And you have to understand, anytime you're willing to get into a fight, that it's going to hurt before you solve the situation. It's going to hurt before it gets better. And so, Putin's blocking food imports. That's, I think, going to actually hurt his country probably worse than it's going to hurt us. But I think as he's massing troops along the border of Ukraine, if he sees that Ukraine could fall, he very well may be in a desperate enough position to invade the eastern part of Ukraine, call it a humanitarian crisis and protecting ethnic Russians, never mind the fact that it was in World War II that they ethnically cleansed the eastern part of Ukraine to call it Russian. So this is where it's going to take President Obama and European leaders standing tough, ratcheting up the economic pressure. I think giving weapons to the Ukrainians, both light and heavy weapons, to help them defend themselves, get them all the intelligence they need on Russian positions. And lastly, the French are still selling. They're still selling the Russians this Mistral warship, which is $1.5 billion ship that the Russians can use to control the Black Sea. That should be canceled, along with a host of other arms sales to the Russians.
That's something that comes up, I think, pretty big in this story right here. How can the U.S. be expected to actually lower any sort of a boom on Russia if not only do they have the French selling them warships, but you have German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who is in there right now still negotiating some sort of a quote-unquote peace process because they and the Russians are in business? How can we honestly do anything if our allies are the ones who are stopping it cold?
Well, look, I think that's a great point. And, part of the problem is you have Europe with no real they're more interested in their economic situation right now than they are in really having a moral center of standing against aggression, and the realization that what's being done right now has not been done in Europe really since World War II, since post World War II era, just tearing apart of a country. So, look, Europe has got to actually take, and Germany specifically has got to take its members of parliament and chancellor making a decision, and not the CEOs of its companies making a decision on behalf of the German people. So, Europe's really got to step up, but the president's in a much better position to lead this than maybe he likes to think. He's kind of talks and operates under this impression that, boy, America's just one of many powers in the world, and what can we do? I can only do what I tried to do. I don't think he quite realizes that America is the power in the world, and Russia's not our equal. This idea that it's the old Soviet Union we're facing against, it's not. This is a ragtag military, a weak economy based simply on energy exports. So let's crush their energy exports and help Europe develop their own energy and make Russia a 20th century gas station that'll be irrelevant for the future.
Wait a minute, a 20th century gas station. Are we really at that point where we could or would want to do something like that?
I think it's going to get to that point, especially if we continue to see Vladimir Putin, especially if we see him move into eastern Ukraine. At that point, he will have violated the rules of in essence, international governance at this point, and made himself a pariah to the rest of the world. So I think, look, half of their government is funded by oil exports. We need to make their oil exports all that much less important, and frankly, increase our exportability here in the United States.
A couple of minutes we got left here. The United States says 10,000 troops on the Ukrainian border. NATO says 20,000 troops on the border. Russia issues a statement, of course, slamming NATO and the Pentagon, claiming that there is no military near the border. It is completely unsubstantiated. That's a statement made by a Ministry of Defense spokesman. Is there incontrovertible evidence that there are those numbers of troops sitting there and they are armed with tanks, missiles, whatever they would need to launch an invasion?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that that's the case. We don't have a reason to come out and say that that's the case if, in fact, it's not. We're not trying to provoke a situation here, and the Russians have not been well known for telling the truth, including the fact that they said the Ukrainian military shot down the Malaysian airplane. So I think NATO and the United States are much more reliable in this case. I think it's been very obvious that Vladimir Putin has every intention of watching Ukraine stay unstable as long as it favors him. And so the evidence we've seen is that there is, in fact, Russian troops. So we may see at any point Russian troops inside of Ukraine, which I think to an extent we already have with the separatists, but real large-scale movements that may happen at any moment. And if it does, the West better be ready to stand up and make these conditions much more hard for Vladimir Putin.
Is there a fear that although he is a former KGB chief and he is not a stupid man, that he may be, I hate to use the word, but crazy at one point? That's something, I mean, there's the old Soviet Union Crazy Ivans that came out, and we never really knew what the Russians were thinking or saying. Is there any thought whatsoever in the American government right now that this guy may just snap somewhere, or somebody in his high-ranking room, if you will have that moment and something absolutely horrible could happen?
Well, look, there is that concern, and you know, he's utterly unpredictable when it comes to maniacal dictators. Look, Adolf Hitler moved into the Rhineland thinking that he might be able to work something out with the Western Europeans, and when he realized they didn't fire a shot and they simply backed off, he moved into the Sudetenland and then Austria, and then his bloodlust became such that he couldn't be satisfied. And so that's the importance right now of standing against people like Vladimir Putin, is make every move they make more costly than any benefit they gain, because if you continue to make it more of a benefit they gain from their moves, they're not going to be stopped. Keep in mind, this is not just Ukraine. He already occupies a third of Georgia. I've been up to that area, the demilitarized zone there. Russia is moving on its neighbors with hard power and also with soft power like energy and economic influence.
Representative Adam Kinzinger, thank you so much for joining us here today. We will check in with you again, sir.
It was great to be here. Thanks
so much. All right, let's spin now to the opinionator on what we have just heard. He hosts the top-rated political talk radio program in Florida. Financial advisor, senior media analyst for the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, Ed Dean joins the fray. Ed, thanks so much for being here today.
Ed, it's great to be with you, my friend.
From an economic standpoint here, is this really the best way to go after Vladimir Putin? Maybe the only sane way to go after him is just keep hammering away at the money and find the money and basically take it out of his pocket?
Ed, I wish more people would ask that question than what is Obama going to do. No disrespect to the congressman, he talked about a street fight. This is more like a text fight. The liberals want to make this as though that this is like a version of the movie The Hunt for Red October. Not even close. As you talked about the Crazy Ivans, there are three schools of thought here, if you want to look at this politically. Coming from the Republican side, you had the Rand Paul type that says we should nowhere be involved in this. Then there's the Rick Perry school of thought that maybe we don't need to invade or try to assist in any type of military aspect, but let's put a few warships off the coast there. And then there are those, as some conservatives have talked about, kind of like some of those on the school of thought, along with what Bill O'Reilly said, that maybe, as you just asked, what about the economic aspect, that we devalue their currency? I think when you look at that, it's probably the safest and could be the most effective way of dealing with Russia as they are boarding up right now along the Ukraine border.
Why then, in your opinion, have those actions not been taken? If it makes a lot of sense then, and if it doesn't put boots on the ground, if it doesn't put the American military involved, and if it might actually save a little money here, I think the American people would be pretty darn happy to see it happen.
You know, you guys earlier talked about the rhetoric. I don't know who has more rhetoric, with all due respect. Is it President Obama or Vladimir Putin out there? The bottom line is what is America's role here? I don't know if you would necessarily been able to stop Putin from doing this, but at least you might give him pause. I like the devaluing of the currency here. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why we're not talking about this. And the bottom line here, there is enough to do something against Russia. The congressman mentioned, and again, he mentioned an interesting point. I might disagree with him about trying to make Europe more energy independent. Why don't we make America more energy independent, and instead of relying on Russia, they have to rely on us?
What, though, would it do to the Russian people and the Russian idea, though, if they are intent on taking over Crimea because they need that for ports? They've got to do something militarily here. 30 seconds I have left. Vladimir Putin cannot just sit back and let America dictate to him. He's got to do something, and it would seem as if the military action is the way that he will go. So it wouldn't seem as if doing anything economically will stop the military groundswell.
Well, it's going to be an interesting question. Can you get the American people behind this president if the president wanted to do that? I don't see that happening. I still think the best way is to devalue the currency of Russia and put some real pressure on them. The only thing that makes sense, if this is all rhetoric, that will prove that point.
All right, let's go from rhetoric then. We'll talk to politics. We'll talk about economics. We'll put it all in the mix, and we absolutely will talk to you again. Ed Dean, thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
Thank you, Ed.
All right, here we go, because Vladimir Putin's got troops on the border, and you heard it. It's rhetoric on both sides now. So where do we start? The president's going to have to make that decision soon. Later on this hour, the new show Black Jesus is not sitting well with some, especially our guest going around the dial. And next up, why using the password 123456 for anything in your wired life is not only a bad idea, but really, it's criminally stupid. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more when MidPoint continues.